I'm Ian Wiliams. I'm speaking with Yusuf Saadi, author of Pluviophile, published by Nightwood Editions, and one of 3 Canadian finalists for this year's Griffin Poetry Prize. Hi, Yusuf.
Hi, Ian. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everyone who's watching.
What's a pluviophile?
It just means lover of rain. I believe it's a kind of mixture of 2 words, Greek and Latin, which actually isn't technically correct. So I think some linguistic purists might have problems with it, but it's a word that I didn't coin myself. I've seen it around and one that I've always liked. So,
Are you a pluviophile?
I'd like to consider myself one, yes.
You'd be happy on the West Coast, right, with that?
Yeah.
So, in a few sentences, how would you describe your collection?
I think it's an amalgamation of all the poems that I've written, really, since I've started writing. So I think there's a lot of poems when I was a younger person and a younger writer, and more recent poems. So it's a wide range of different kinds of experiences and emotions and writing techniques that are all kind of meshed together.
Mm-hmm. And how about the 3-part structure here? How did you land on that?
So I can't take credit for that. That's mostly my publisher, and particularly one of my editors, Silas White. So when I kind of brought the initial manuscript, I didn't really have any understanding of like the macro sphere of how all the poems fit together. So I never really thought about that before. So I can't even remember the kind of initial order of it. And then he suggested an order, which just seemed to me like to work a lot better. The way that the poems kind of spoke to each other a little bit. And also there's a slight rhyme or reason to why they were there. So for example, the last poem, I think it starts like with it being the last word. And so it kind of fits in with that sense of a conclusion.
So here's a little bit of a memory test, okay? What is the very first poem that you wrote in this collection? It's your debut collection, your first book. And what is the last poem that you wrote in this collection?
So if I'm not mistaken, the first poem was actually a poem that I submitted for an undergraduate creative writing course as part of the portfolio, and it was just 4 lines long. So it's called Surah. And then over a couple of years, it changed into all of these different kinds of forms. At one point it became like a giant block of text, and then it took on different line breaks, and it ended up being the longest poem in the collection. So that was my first one. And I believe the last one is actually the last poem in the collection, which is called Pleasuring Shahrazad.
And what changed inside you between the first poem and the last poem? How many years are we talking between the first and the last?
Probably about 7 years.
Okay.
I think like emotionally, I'm a little bit different. I mean, when you're in your early 20s, I think you're a bit more emotionally turbulent, which isn't necessarily a bad thing for your poetry, but it's different. And I feel like now I can kind of deal with my emotions a little bit better. So there's that in terms of like my internal composition. And also I think like in terms of like my writing mechanics, I think they've changed a bit. I think earlier on, I tended to be a bit more narrative, whereas now I feel like my poetry is more driven by like sound and rhythm, or at least I'm more conscious of those things.
Mm-hmm. Well, the judges describe you as, quote, a poet unafraid of the daily grind of writing poetry at night with the rust of our lives. That last part is from one of your poems. Now, I sense that there was the frustration of youth at a world that's malfunctioning. And I wonder to what degree you feel like your concerns are the concerns of contemporary poets or concerns of your generation. Are you representing?
I mean, I think the first thing to say is I didn't intend to represent anyone else but myself. I mean, I'd be happy if other people find some kind of solace or connection in my work, of course. But I think, and maybe my approach is a little bit different because I feel like a lot of other writers are concerned with the way technology has changed our understandings of the world and changed the way that we use language. So like social media, texting, those things like that. And I feel like that's not at the forefront of my writing. So maybe in that way, I'm a little bit different. But I think a lot of my writing is about finding the world at times kind of flat or uninspired and trying to almost compensate for that with the writing. And I don't think that's just a recent thing. I think that's almost like a kind of capital R romantic gesture.
Can we hear a little bit of one of your poems?
Yeah, of course. I'd love to. So this is the poem that I mentioned called Surah. So I'm just going to read the first 4 or 5 lines from it. I'm intimate with 3 a.m. Outside my window, a garden rose glowers at her blemished petals, dreaming of bouquets. Potholes plot assassinations of car tires, and street lamps listen to all confessions.
Thank you, Yusuf.
Thank you so much.
I've been speaking with Yusuf Saadi, author of Pluviophile and published by Nightwood. He is one of the 3 Canadian finalists for this year's Griffin Poetry Prize.